The Internet History Podcast is brought to you by MetaLab. Their slogan is MetaLab, we make interfaces. For a decade, MetaLab has helped some of the world's top companies and entrepreneurs build products that millions of people use every day. You probably didn't realize it at the time, but the odds are you've used an app that they've helped design or build. Apps like Slack, Coinbase, Facebook Messenger, Oculus, Lonely Planet, and many more. MetaLab wants to bring their unique design philosophy to your project. Let them take your brainstorm and turn it into the next billion-dollar app, from idea sketched on the back of a napkin to a final shipped product. Check them out at metalab.co. That's metalab.co. Welcome to the Internet History Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Brian McCullough. Ken Norton is a partner at GV, which is, of course, Alphabet's venture capital arm. But before that, he was a product manager at Google, where he led the development of products like Google Docs, Google Calendar, and Google Mobile Maps. But he was also early at JotSpot, which became Google Sites, was a product manager at Yahoo, was an early employee at CNET, and was CTO of Snap, a company probably none of you have heard of, but I've been dying to talk about for years. No, not Snapchat. The original Snap, the dot-com era Snap. So this is another great episode with a guy who has played roles in a ton of our favorite companies and general topics. Please enjoy this conversation with Ken Norton. And remember, if you haven't picked up the book that was based on this podcast, it would make an excellent holiday gift, I think. It's called How the Internet Happened, From Netscape to the iPhone. It's available anywhere fine books are sold. Ken Norton, thanks for coming on the Internet History Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we start off at the beginning of the beginning in a way. So I can see, Ken, that you went to Boston University to... I think your major was poli-sci and philosophy. And philosophy I get. I know a lot of people that ended up as engineers. Philosophy is actually a good entree into engineering. But so how did you end up a software engineer with those majors?
That's a good question. I think to kind of go back, before college, I'd always been using computers. I mean, my dad bought us an Apple II Plus. That was kind of my first computer. And then I remember, we were such early adopters that we actually upgraded from the Apple II Plus to the Apple IIe. So that was kind of, our second generation computer. And my parents, I grew up in Western New York, in Buffalo. My parents didn't have a lot of money. So I still kind of to this day am amazed that, my dad decided that was something that we needed to own. But I was, always just, hacking on computers and programming. And it just was, kind of something that I did. It was, it was a hobby, and I was into BBSs and everything else. But when I got to college, it was never, for whatever reason, it never kind of connected the dots for me that maybe would be a career. It's kind of like if you really like building model ships, and you're kind of like, well, that's my hobby. Well, what am I going to do for a real job? And you would never be like, so it just never kind of connected for me. And so I never thought about studying computer science. Like I don't remember deliberately deciding against it. I think it just kind of never, crossed the wires in my brain that, like, hey, this is something you really love to do. Why don't you make that, your career?
Well, and people forget that now, that in the 80s,
Yeah.
in the world we live in, it's hard to imagine this, but in the 80s, there's not a lot of that's not shown as like a role model or a template that people can be software engineers. You just see the product, you don't know that there's people behind it.
Yeah, it doesn't. And I've talked to other folks, and I've talked to friends who had kind of similar experiences, and maybe it was kind of seen more vocational, or I don't know, and I don't know, maybe if I'd even said I'm going to be a computer programmer, if people in my life have been like, no, you can get a real job and go to law school or whatever. but so I got to college, and my plan was to go to law school and go into politics, and that was kind of the path. And so I studied philosophy and really political theory. So I think poli sci and philosophy was what I did study logic and ethics and a level kind of traditional philosophy, but really I was much more into political theory. And the end of my college experience coincided with me doing an internship in Washington D.C. And that the plan there was I was going to go to D.C. for the summer, do my internship, and get a job, and then that was I was going to do that, and then kind of go to law school. And this is 1993, so it was it was a recession. And it kind of pales in comparison to the dot-com crash and the financial crash since then. But there were no jobs to be had, and I spent a good several days just kind of walking up and down the halls of the Senate office building and the congressional office buildings, just putting my resume in bins and hoping for a callback. And actually, I since then have learned that the sucker move is to put the resume in the bin, but really what you want to do is you want to hand it to a legislative aide, because other people can take the resumes out of the bins. So who knows if anybody even saw my resume. But I think I was done with that internship, and I graduated, and I was like, okay, well, I clearly, I'm not going to be working here in Washington D.C. So maybe I'll just, move back to Buffalo, live with my mom for a little bit of time until I can kind of get my act together. And really that was me kind of pretending that was a deliberate decision and wasn't really the only option left for me. So I moved back to Buffalo, and the first thing I did was like, well, I should get a job so I can get paid. Well, what do I know how to do? Well, something with computers. We'll find some kind of something I can do that'll pay the bills. And so I went and found a temp agency, and they said, well, if you know computers, there's a company that is looking for people to do tech support on the phone, and we don't know much about it, but you should go kind of check it out. And so it turns out it's this company that had just been awarded the Microsoft telesales contract. And so they were looking for phone agents to essentially answer inbound sales for people that wanted to upgrade Microsoft Office. It was at the time, I think it was like, actually, I probably remember all this. It was like Office, 4.2. It was like Word 6.0, Excel 5.0, PowerPoint 4.0. I remember that because I said that over and over and over and over and over on the phones. I got a temp job working the phones for Microsoft.
Well, so the company was like Citel or something like that?
They went through a bunch of incarnations. They were called Upgrade Corporation of America then, and they actually really became kind of the foremost tech employer in Western New York. There was another company, Ingram Micro, which is a distributor, and they really became kind of this little kind of tech revival, and then ended up getting bought by SoftBank. And then eventually became this company that's still around today called Citel. Mm-hmm. But since then, a lot of this stuff ended up becoming offshored. But I guess in the early '90s, Buffalo was the offshoring. And so so I just went in there and started just working the phones for Microsoft and doing inbound sales and eventually technical support. And then after several months of that, the CTO of the company kind of started to build up a team to start to do some more interesting stuff. And eventually I caught his eye, and he said, "Oh, you should come work for me. You know how to code." And spent about 3 years there building fax on demand systems and in IVR, interactive voice response systems for the company. And that was really, it's kind of like, that was my first programming job. And, it was literally like right out of college, but almost now you look back at my career, and college was in some ways kind of a 4-year, pause on being, in the computer industry.
Didn't you also create like a web-based customer support system or something like that,
I
or
well, I
work on
did,
it.
and that's why I ended up leaving. So I got super excited about the web, and this is, I think you've had so many folks on the podcast who are like this, who are just, as soon as you kind of got the web, you realized it was just going to change everything, right? And you're like, everything that we're doing, we're going to someday do on the web. And so I would sit there and be like, wait, we're charging Microsoft to have people call an 800 number to order, a technical document that we're then going to fax to them. Like, and that's going to be the web, right? That's how that's going to work. And so I tried to get people excited about that. And I got one kind of senior leader in the company excited about the web enough to where they let me kind of, go explore on my own. The one thing I actually convinced them to do was to drop a 56K, dedicated line to my desk so that I could hack around with web stuff. So I had literally the only internet connection to the company. And, it cost like $2,000 a month or something. So it was obviously a real, vote of confidence from the CTO that he was just like, yeah, you can go ahead and explore that. And so, we built some of the first, kind of, web-based customer support and technical support systems. And, a lot of it was to kind of take what we were doing at the time, which was fax on demand. So for people who don't remember fax on demand, you'd call an 800 number, you'd go through a, automated menu, and you'd say, well, I want, a spec sheet on this, or I want, a document or an FAQ on this. And then you'd eventually type in your fax number. And then, a few minutes later, the fax would come in over your fax machine. So it's this incredibly roundabout, circuitous, like painfully time consuming interaction that really just should be going to a URL. You're eventually going to a search engine. So, but part of the reason I left was, I didn't sense that the company was excited about it. I just didn't think that they got it or were excited enough to really want to invest in the web. And for me, the kind of breaking point was in 1995. I got really excited about wanting to be out in Silicon Valley, and so I convinced my girlfriend at the time to come out here for San Francisco for vacation. And we happened to visit the week that Netscape went public. So I actually looked this up because I was curious. It was August 9th, 1995, which is also the day Jerry Garcia died.
Right.
So we were in San Francisco, on the day that Netscape went public, and Jerry Garcia died. And my girlfriend then, she was way more interested in the Jerry Garcia side of it. I was way more interested in the Netscape side of it. And I was like, oh man, like something is happening here. Like I need to be here. I need to somehow get out, to Silicon Valley and to just, get into the web, like not to just be hacking around at this company that's doing something else, but I want to do something that really involves this technology.
So did you, again, send your resume around? Is that how you ended up at CNET?
Yeah, eventually it took a little while, but effectively, yeah, that's what happened. There was actually two companies that were recruiting me pretty heavily. One was Organic Online. I'm not sure if you remember
Yeah.
Organic.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Bellendorf's company, and
Yep.
and they were doing really cool stuff. And they actually, I still feel bad about this, but they were the ones that actually flew me out for the interview. And then while I was out, I also interviewed at CNET, and so I ended up taking the CNET job. So I've always kind of, I don't know why I feel guilty, but I've always kind of felt like, oh, they gave me an offer and they flew me out, and then I kind of like on the sly, went and interviewed with CNET. But CNET then was really a television studio, and this was in early '96. I interviewed with Halsey Minor, who's the founder. Ended up working for him for several years, and Kevin Wendell, who was he came from E! Online. He was kind of running their entertainment studio, and the office was really a television studio, and they just had
Right.
no print.
Let me explain that just a little bit. So, Halsey's been on the show, I think, in the first 30 or so episodes, really early on. So, if people want to look
Yeah.
that up, you can get more details on that then. But so originally, CNET was founded as like a cable network for tech news, essentially. I think in like '93, and then it like a lot of other people, like Wired and other people, like when the web actually happens, it's like, well, we need to be on this if we're covering this.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So, and actually, Halsey had, and I should go back and listen to that episode, but I mean, he was actually kicking ideas around with Jeff Bezos before he started CNET, and they ended up, not starting something together, but that was kind of the original incarnation. But yeah, I mean, Halsey was like, hey, this, computer is tech. This is going to be a thing. There's going to be a huge market for this. And what you would think in the early '90s is, well, I should build a dedicated, a cable television news station for this audience. But then he had the foresight to be like, wait, really, this is an online media company, and I kind of was hired in the early days of them starting to think, how do we really become an internet company? And and this will kind of give you a sense of what the company was like then. I was really the first software engineer on the West Coast. They had a team in New Jersey, a bunch of folks out of Belcor, that were kind of the primary engineering team. And CNET was in North Beach, in this big, beautiful building that just looked like a television studio. And there was this tiny room upstairs, kind of in the corner, that they called the online room, because that was where the people that were working on the online stuff were. And not only was that where those of us that were working on the website sat, that was literally where the website was. There were like a couple of Spark 20s, what we could call the pizza box Spark Station 20s that were running the site. And they were on one end of the room, and those of us on the engineering side, we were kind of on the other end of the room. And then slowly over the next couple of years, I mean, obviously, the online entire company really became, dedicated to being web first. And we still had television shows for some period of time, but
Right.
but I actually, one anecdote from those days is one of the guys who shared a big desk with me was Ryan Seacrest.
Mm.
Ryan Seacrest was one of the television personalities for one of the shows. And this is before he ended up doing everything else since then. But he hardly needed a desk because he was like one of the TV personalities or something. But it only dawned on me several years later that that guy was that guy from.
Yeah, I think I mentioned
I
that.
didn't connect the dots. Yeah.
I think I mentioned that on the show before too, because I discovered that one day going down a rabbit hole, and I was like, "Oh, that's an interesting thing." But so what your job is? What? And I say what in the sense of, if they're moving online, we're still. If this is '96, we're still talking about. You're going to get a major publication online, but there's no CMS. There are no
Mm-hmm.
CMSs at this point. So what are you working on
Yeah.
specifically?
Build the CMS.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's, and this is part of what was, when I look back on these days, was just so fun, and at the same time, it's just so frightening, is this notion that you had to build everything. You don't today it's like you want to deploy a website. Well, what should I use? Should I Ruby on Rails or something? It's like we didn't
Pull
have
it off
that.
the shelf.
We had
Yeah.
to, yeah, build everything. We literally were like building our own load balancers by like hacking some version of DNS that one of the engineers found that it had a bug in it that allowed you to just basically rotate IP addresses. So that we had to kind of build the entire stack. And the main thing that we really wanted to build up was a content management system, because we're starting to do a lot more. So we had CNET.com, that was kind of the flagship, and we were starting to build News.com, which ended up becoming the primary news site. And that was really my first big project there. And so the Eng team, and including me and a lot of folks at CNET, we basically built our own web server, our own templating system, our own content management system, and that actually ended up becoming Vignette Story Server. So Vignette, at some point, we ended up basically licensing the technology to this other company, Vignette, so that they could sell it to other sites in exchange for percentage of the company. And Vignette ended up going public, and CNET made tons and tons of money on that. But that had really started because we just needed something that that we could use for our editorial staff, and nobody else is doing. I mean, Wired was doing it, and I feel like there was maybe like one other site that was even close to be operating at that kind of scale, at that level of technical capability.
Well, and you mentioned news.com, but also I feel like download.com doesn't get enough credit
Yeah,
these days.
yeah.
Tell me about
Well,
download.com.
yeah. So download.com, and then I'll tell a story about the domains, because that was
Oh
really
yeah, yeah. Oh yeah. Oh
it was
cool. Yeah,
really
yeah, yeah.
the intellectual property here. So download.com was, you're kind of like, one of the hardest things to do back then was, there was so much shareware and freeware, and it's like, even just to like, you want to download the Netscape browser or something, it's just like you couldn't even figure out where to download, because there weren't any good search engines, and a lot of stuff was FTP, and FTP, was notoriously flaky, so maybe the server would be up, maybe it would be down. And so the vision for download.com was just like, it was basically just a search engine for all the shareware and software you ever thought you needed or wanted to download. And so we were, and we didn't host it. Eventually, I think we did. But in the beginning, we were just like, we were just trying to find it. And so that served this like incredible need that you didn't realize anybody had, which is, I'm just trying to find a piece of software. I want to try to find Winamp or whatever. It is like whatever kind of piece of shareware or software was out there. And
No, and I feel
it's
like
really hard to find it.
that's what's gotten lost is you can't, again today, however many years on, things like Winamp, like you hear about it and you wouldn't know. There's no app store. There's, like you said, there's no search engines. So you're like, I want to try this new thing. There's an entire generation of people like me that download.com was such an important resource.
Absolutely. Yeah. And before that, it would be like, here's this random FTP server, and, log on with this user and this password, and it's, hosted at Carnegie Mellon or something. And you'd go and you'd log on, and then it didn't work, or, it would be downloading at like 1K an hour or something. So that was the vision. And download.com became a huge moneymaker because they started to, they started to get paid for downloads. I mean, so they started to, get paid by Netscape and Internet, Microsoft for Internet Explorer downloads, and it actually became pretty significant cash cow. And that was built on the same platform, the same CMS.
So
So
it's
the
not
domains,
a
I'll tell you. Oh,
it's yeah. I was just gonna say it's not a perfect analogy, but imagine a Web 1.0 sort of app store, kind of. But anyway, now so tell me about the domains. Yeah.
I'll take the App Store analogy. Yeah. So the domain. So one of the basically a ton of the value that CNET had was just having all these incredible domains, like just download.com, news.com. I remember we had coffee.com, and if I recall correctly, I think we had coffee.com, and then we registered MrCoffee.com so that we could trade for java.com from the Mr. Coffee company. So it was, but the story there is, there was this guy, Matthew Barzin, who's one of the first employees of CNET, super great guy, actually was Barack Obama's ambassador to England. So he's gone on to do great things.
Mm-hmm.
He was one of the early employees, and he was kind of had this job that really had no title, that involved literally finding a copy machine for the office in the beginning to kind of just everything. And he was one of the ones that really kind of had the foresight with Halsey of just like, we should just register all these domain names. They just sit around and be like, hey, maybe someday we could do we could do this or we could do that. Yeah, go register a whole bunch of domain names. And this is back when you would just, if you wanted to register a domain name, you would just fire off an email in a certain format to an address at Internet, and then you'd get a response, and it was yours. Like, you didn't pay for it. Like, you certainly didn't have to buy it from anyone else because it wasn't registered. So they were one of the first ones to just register all these tremendously valuable kind of single word domain names, and then to build businesses around them. And that took a lot of foresight, because I mean, even then I just kind of felt like, what are all these for? Like this is kind of download.com. Like that's what's a website download.com? That's stupid.
Yeah, I had Gary Kremen on, who founded Match.com, and he told me similar stories about that Wild West time of registering all those domains. So Snap is a spinoff of CNET, right?
Right.
Okay,
Right.
and so Snap is like an attempt to do search like Wired did with Hotbot and stuff.
Right. Yeah. So we actually had a search engine, search.com. No, no
Okay.
surprise, given everything I just said about
Right.
the domains. But it was really just a front end in the beginning to just a hotbot, I think. So we had a partnership with Wired, and Yahoo was starting to kind of take off, and I think Halsey, had the vision for, I think, what eventually we would kind of come to think of as portals, but it was long before we called them portals, which is just like, all right, if you believe that millions and millions of people are going to be coming onto the internet, they can't have the same experience we did. Like, they can't be like WinSock, DLL, pop, whatever, all this crap that we had to go through to get online. Like, we want them to have a great experience. There needs to be a kind of a starting point. And so if we were to build kind of the homepage to the internet, and build content around that and the search experience around that, we could then go partner with all of these ISPs that are going to be basically wanting to sell the pipes. And so we can basically build this experience, partner with them, and then acquire hopefully all these users as they came online. And so eventually what we came to call portals, but I think the earlier vision for Snap was much more that we were going to basically be kind of like the white label provider, for the ISPs as they kind of go signing up customers. We would be kind of the homepage for them.
So it's more, maybe that's why it ends up with NBC, because it was more okay. You weren't trying to build your own business. You were trying to essentially spin it off and have someone come take it over.
No, I think we wanted to be a standalone business, but I think our goal was that you would, if you sign up through AT&T, you'd get the AT&T version of Snap, att.snap.com, and it would be ATT branded, and it would say Snap, but it would be AT&T's kind of has some control over the experience. And so that was, as we kind of started to build that out. So I was, part of this, as I was kind of looking for a new project, I was kind of part of that really early team. Kind of Halsey just, I remember just one day it was just like, all right, you have a new project, and you're going to be moving to a different building, and we're taking you away from everyone, and here's what we're doing. And then, 2 years later, suddenly, there's like 250 people working on it, and NBC is investing, and then ultimately NBC bought us. And we spun out of CNET and eventually became NBC Internet.
So this is, I told you offline, this is what I was super excited to talk about, because this to me is something that, again, has been flushed down the memory hole, is this couple of years where, especially media companies, but all kinds of companies, all of a sudden everyone has to have an internet play.
Yep.
And so NBCI is NBC's internet play. I'm going to let you just tell me what you want to tell me about it, and then there's a couple questions I want to ask. But so tell me about NBCI, or your time at NBCI, or what they wanted to do, anything like that.
Yeah, I don't think it made a lot of sense to me at the time. I think I think there was a sense that everybody recognized that the internet was the future of media, and so if you are NBC or any stodgy old media company, like you have to be doing something, and like what that something was, nobody could figure out. But there was definitely a lot of FOMO around, should we be, like I remember the story that everybody always told that at the time kind of raised eyebrows of an example of what they wanted to do was, someday you're going to be watching Friends. And of course, Friends was really popular. That was like one of the marquee shows. And NBC was really at the top of the world. They were like the #1 news network. You're going to be watching Friends. and you're going to click on Jennifer Aniston's sweater and buy it. Like that,
Right,
that
right,
was
right.
like, and I think now you can do that on Instagram, right? We've maybe finally gotten there, but nobody remembers Friends. But you're just like, okay, I get it, but it was clear that they just knew that their business was endangered, but they didn't know enough about the web or the internet to know even what that meant, and they didn't know enough to even know like that. That means you're probably not going to be doing it the way you do it today. Not doing it the way you do it today, augmented by e-commerce, right? Like, it's going to be a whole different experience. But it turns out they had a group at NBC called NBC Interactive, that had a ton of really smart people, who were trying to do some stuff with the internet, and they were the ones that really kind of spearheaded the CNET, the investment in CNET and Snap, and ultimately the acquisition. And I think that they were also kind of getting frustrated with just NBC, and at the time NBC was owned by GE, so you're not just talking NBC, stodgy, old, and slow. You're talking really General Electric. And so I think they kind of were like, look, if we need to do something in the internet, we need to do it with somebody who understands the internet, and so we should go invest all in.
But
Um,
what you're describing is my favorite part of it, is that like this is a period, we're talking like 98, 99, where if a company says it's going all in on the internet, their stock pops 30% in a day or something. But
yeah,
but at the same time, they legitimately don't know. It's
no,
not like, well, we see, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what even the product would be. They just know that we need to be doing this, in quotes, whatever
right,
this is.
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and the canonical example of that was just adding a .com to your name, and then suddenly you're stuck. You've created billions of dollars of value. So, and this is things were really starting to get frothy. Like, I don't, now looking back, it's like, this is when things were just getting absurd, and that I had been there all along, so I hadn't seen it getting as crazy, because by then this is now 4 or 5 years that I've been working in .com, so I didn't quite get how just ridiculous it was getting. And I and even after they did the acquisition, like, I didn't realize that it was something that they actually at the, like, Bob Wright, who was the head of NBC, and Jack Welch level
Hmm.
cared
Hmm.
about. And until when they went to basically announce the acquisition, they flew us out to New York, and there's Jack Welch, he's spending 3 days with us, right? I mean, this guy runs General Electric, right? And
Yeah.
he's like, this
Yeah.
is the most important thing to our business. We Yeah, so that was, I felt like a fish out of water there, because they decided that they were going to do the press conference in studio. What is it, 8H? That's the SNL studio, I think.
Right.
So we do the press conference in studio 8H, and the first thing I did was completely embarrass myself in front of Bob Wright and Jack Welch, because they get us up on stage, and they're kind of just briefing us, and they're like, here's where the cameras are going to be, and here's where you're going to sit, and there's like five chairs on the stage, and one of the people who's kind of coordinating things is like, well, we're going to need another chair, and so I like turn around and grab a chair, and everybody's like, no, 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 and I'm like, what? And like, put the chair down. I was like, what do you wait? So I don't know anything about union rules in a television studio, but it turns out, like, that's a major faux pas when you're especially when
Right.
you're standing with the NBC and GE executives, to start, like, essentially undermining so whoever is the union labor
The
contract
Teamsters got to do
manager.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. So 20 minutes later, some guy comes out with a headset and moves the chair for us, but that, like, I probably escaped without getting my knees broken or something from that. But I was just like, they really, like, they don't know what they're doing, but boy, they really think it's important. I mean, this is like, this company is really all in on this, and they had also kind of mashed CNBC.com in with this, so they'd kind of taken the disparate other little internet properties that they had, whatever they amounted to, and kind of like really threw them all into this basket they were calling NBC Internet. But it was it was clear that they knew that this mattered. It was clear they knew it was important. You know, it was clear that they saw dollar signs. You know, I think probably ultimately, but also there was kind of maybe a little bit of a sense of existential dread of, you know, are we going to be bundling, you know, channels on cable network and, you know, running must see TV on Thursdays,
Right.
and I don't think so. We better figure something out.
Well, and speaking of dollar signs, didn't NBCI didn't they IPO, or am I misremembering that?
Yeah, we did. We did.
Right.
Yeah, it was, well, so it was one of these kind of weird things. So I actually neglected to mention there's this other company involved, this company called Zoom, uh,
Right. Right.
XOOM, and they were kind of like, you know, plugged into this as well. And really, I think it was because they were already public, so it was basically kind of a reverse IPO type of thing. So we didn't go through the roadshow process. So we kind of was more of like kind of an acquisition of a public company that became the new public company or whatever, which was kind of popular then. But yeah, we were a public company, which was, you know, a whole new experience for me because I was the chief technology officer, and now suddenly I'm, you know, like a named, you know,
Hmm.
executive in a public company, and like, you know, like going on a road show for secondaries and filing, you know, SEC stuff, and you know, that kind of just was just sudden. It was just
Well,
like,
and the
how this
reason
happened.
that they have to do that, aside from, you know, you can actually make money, you can spit it out and have this valuable company that you own 30% of, but also because since if you're in NBC or you're inside GE, you can't attract talent because you can't give them stock options. You need to get that stock currency to attract talent, right?
Yep. Oh yeah. Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And that was why, you know, that I think that was in a lot of ways a kind of the proposition to get, a lot of the folks that had been working on this at NBC to really want to kind of come in, and work in NBCI. And in retrospect, I mean, you know, I was really afraid of that because they sent four executives in, one of whom became our COO, this guy named Edmund Sanctus, and I was just like, oh man, they're sending the NBC, you know, execs in to like run this place. These people are going to be total clowns. But it turns out they were the four that like that had to get out of NBC, right? You know, they were the ones that wanted to volunteer to come to NBCI because they like really believed, you know, in the internet and the .com world, and just were kind of fed up with the weenies at NBC. So they ended up being, I mean, you know, they're folks that, you know, I continue to know, and, you know, have gone on to do great things on the internet. And so it's kind of funny because you're just like, oh, they're parachuting in these NBC execs that are going to be our new bosses. You know, and then from their perspective, they were probably like, we're finally free. We can actually like do web stuff free from
Well,
the binds of NBC.
and as I stipulated, there were plenty of plays like this. Like the reason that Go.com was Disney's play. That's why you can still see
Right.
vestigial. If you're trying to go to ESPN, you can sometimes go.espn.
Never goes away.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'm gonna yada yada over a little bit. This Snap was the fastest growing search engine of its time. You know, I'm sure that the NBCI properties at the time when this mattered in a big way were probably in the top 10 or top 20 of you know, web properties in terms of traffic and things like that. I'm curious. Did you leave that before the bubble burst?
I left in March 2000,
So
which was
exactly
literally
when.
when the bill burst. You know, I'd been planning to leave, you know, for some time because I think I was, you know, I was, you know, to me in this, you know, I think now in retrospect, everything still felt so immature and nascent back then, but it felt like it had, you know, or it got too big and it's too slow, and you know, but you know, I mean, I was a CTO of a public company. I had, you know, 250 some odd people reporting to me, a huge engineering organization. You know, it just wasn't, you know, the type of role that I think I really was, I really wanted, to have, you know, kind of like it grew up around me, but it wasn't something where I was like, this is what I really want. So I was kind of planning to make a move. You know, it took several months, and it turns out like when you work for a public company, like you can't just be like, yeah, here's my 2 week notice. You know, it's like, oh, we gotta ease you out and find a replacement, and you know, we gotta message it properly and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, you know, my last day was March 2000, and no one should cry for me, but I was in a lockup of my stock for another 6 months because of a secondary we'd done. So I didn't, I got to kind of like quit and then just like watch the value of my stock go from like, $100 a share to like 20 to like 10 to 5, and couldn't do anything about it. But yeah, that was literally March 2000. I think was when Nasdaq just exploded, and everything started to fall apart.
So then, I guess Grand Central is a startup.
Yeah. So the story there is Halsey Minor, who again was the founder of CNET. He was starting an incubator. They called it 12 Entrepreneuring, with Eric Greenberg, who is the founder of Science. So a couple of guys made a ton of money, wanted to build startups. So I went to work there, but really I went to work there to start this company, that an idea that we had been kicking around called Grand Central, which was the original vision for it was Salesforce.com had kind of just started. It was still very early. Halsey was one of the early investors in Salesforce, and I was kind of like, same as I'd been doing for several years at that point, looking at stuff and seeing how the web would just completely replace it. And so I saw Salesforce.com and I was like, well, geez, everybody's enterprise software is just going to run in a web browser. Like, why would you go spend millions and millions of dollars to a company like Oracle or Siebel to license software and run it off servers and build out a data center? Like, you're just going to, like, Salesforce.com is the future of this software. And then so I said, okay, well, if companies are going to be, their Salesforce automation is going to be on Salesforce.com, and their ERM systems are going to be on ERM.com, and all this other kind of stuff. Like, there's somehow all these systems need to talk to each other. So there needs to be some sort of basically data integration layer for the cloud. This is before we were kind of calling it the cloud. So that was the original vision for it. We were way too early in retrospect, and a lot of this. A lot of scaffolding and technology exists today. A lot of the major cloud providers are doing this. Salesforce.com, itself is doing this in a lot of ways. So that was kind of the original vision. So I kind of cut loose from MBCI and then went to Halsey's incubator, and then we started Grand Central there. And so then I did that for the next couple of years.
Were you at Inktomi? I'm trying to get us to Yahoo. Were you briefly at Inktomi as well?
I was, yeah. So
wow.
Then
How are you?
Yeah, it's a dark chapter there. It's hard to piece together, but yeah. So I left Grand Central, and I interviewed at Google. So this is when I was just like, okay, I still really love web and web search. I kind of still had this sense of like, I feel like I love search. Like, it hasn't been done right. Still feels like there's opportunities. So I, interviewed at Google, almost came here then. That would have been 2002. Inktomi at that point was actually not in great shape. Inktomi had, was starting to do everything except web search. They were doing like web caching and hardware and all this kind of stuff. And so they convinced me to come there to run product for the search piece of Inktomi, which they were basically kind of battening down the hatches to focus all of Inktomi on search again. So I was like, well, I'll kind of give it a try. We'll see what happens. And I think the real hope was that we would either get Inktomi search back where we were competitive again, or that we would sell the company, which is what we ended up doing, selling it to Yahoo. So I went and joined Inktomi in this weird time where, like, I was like one of the few people that were joining because everybody else was like leaving and getting laid off. And so I show up and it's like bustling floor. Here's your desk. Come in the next day and you're like, there's only 5 people on the floor. It turns out all those other people you saw yesterday, that was like their last day, because they're all getting laid off. So it was kind of a weird time, but we were able to basically sell Inktomi to Yahoo, and Yahoo bought Inktomi, and I went into the company and with Yahoo, and we became basically Yahoo search platform team, because for years, much to Yahoo's, ultimate demise. Like they never really owned search. They're always partnering with Inktomi, or at the time with Google. So that was kind of how I got to Yahoo. So I ended up, officially being in Inktomi. I think it only ended up something being like 6 months, and then for the rest of that was with Yahoo.
So I've had Gary Flake on the pod to talk about Yahoo search and search in general from this period. But you're working on things like Yahoo Shopping and Toolbar and image search and things like that?
Yeah, yeah. So Jeff Weiner, who went on to become CEO of LinkedIn, he was running the search team, and this was, I look back at it, and this was a great time. Yeah, I mean, we were doing, we were growing market share in search. We were doing really cool things.
Can I interrupt real quick, because what people, and this is important, I think people forget about this, but so the bubble burst, and it hurts Yahoo very badly, because Yahoo was making a ton of money off all the .coms that were paying up for ads and things like that. So Yahoo could, I mean, I don't know how close it came to going under, but it was possibly one of these .com companies that it could have gone under. But from the bubble bursting through like 2004, 5, 6, there was a real turnaround that made Yahoo the company that survived as long as it did.
Yeah, it did. This is really Web 2.0 days, and and the talent there. So I mean, my tech lead when I was running Yahoo Shopping was a guy named Brian Acton, who went on to be the founder of WhatsApp.
Yeah.
We bought Slack, and of course, we bought Flickr, and of course Stuart Butterfield went on to start Slack. Chi Lu went on to be a really senior guy at Microsoft, and now is Y Combinator. So there's a tremendous kind of pool of really, really talented people, and I think what we had was the executive kind of oversight and vision of a guy like Jeff to say, Yahoo really needs to be able to compete with just a lot of the raw materials. I mean, with now having Inktomi plus Alta Vista plus Fast, like having basically all the search technology in the universe that wasn't at Google, and the currency of a growing stock price that would allow us to do acquisitions. And so, we did a lot of really cool things. I mean, those were really kind of good days. It felt like we were accomplishing a lot. I think ultimately that it was just too late, quite frankly, when it came to Google. But also I think it just goes to show how much they had squandered. I mean, how much of an opportunity, they had lost by nature of, focusing on the wrong things, focusing on the portal things instead of the actual search. And even when I came in, I mean, there were still pockets of people there who were just like, I don't even understand like why we should do search. It's a commodity. You'd hear that a lot. You'd hear the analogy, it's like the electric company. It's like, yeah, you need every business needs electricity, but you're not going to make your own electricity. You just like plug into the grid, you're done. So why do we need to build our own search engine? Like just plug into the grid, just get the commodity search from Inktomi or now Google, who cares? And it's like, well, you created this behemoth, with Google, but basically they just, they just powered the most important experience on your site for how many years?
And with the little logo there that says powered by. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we would do tests, this is kind of funny stuff to give you a sense of just the value of that brand then. And we would do user tests where we would, run, our Inktomi search, versus Google with the Google logo, with the Yahoo logo, and kind of vice versa. And it was just like, there were times where we were as good, or sometimes, they were slightly better, but we were close. People couldn't tell the difference, but they'd see the Google logo, and then, that would be enough for people to decide that the quality was better. So that kind of just gave you a sense of the brand that, that Google had built at that point, and just the tremendous head start that they had.
Real quick before we leave Yahoo, I read somewhere that you were really involved, or maybe even spearheaded the Flickr acquisition.
Yeah. There's a guy named Bradley Horowitz who works here with me today at Google, and I were the two that kind of worked on that. I actually I was sent up to kind of be the closer, and go talk to the entire company up in Vancouver. The kind of like the last day where Stuart and Katerina Fake, the co-founder, had kind of told the company, we had this acquisition offer from Yahoo, we're contemplating it. So I flew up, and turned out it was like in the middle of a blizzard to go up to Vancouver to kind of give the closing sell, to convince them to sell, which I know Stuart, I think, still holds over me today, but I've apologized for. But yeah, that was a great team. I mean, that was, what they had built. I know you've covered Flickr, it's really, I think, hard for anyone who wasn't online in those days, or wasn't experiencing Flickr, just how innovative that product was, just how far ahead. Obviously they were doing things like tagging, but even just like, they were the first ones where you could just click on click on the title field and it would turn yellow and you could edit it, right? Like nobody had clicked to edit anything, and that was like their entire experience. So that, kind of Ajax, what they call the Ajaxy kind of,
right. Well, Ajax, but not only that, just to give the Yahoo guy or YouTube guys were like, well, how come it's not as easy to put something on the web, a video on the web, as it is a photo, And so Flickr leads the way in that sense of the user experience, and also, there's the famous story that the Facebook guys really realized the nature of virality when they put photos with user tagging and photos up, and within a week they have more photos up than Flickr or something. I can't remember exactly what the number. But so again, Flickr intuiting two of the things that we take for granted today was so far ahead. Yeah.
And I think what we loved about it was, we just loved we love the user experience, and this is the early days of kind of social software, so we love the social aspect of it. I particularly was very excited about tagging because for me as a search person, tagging is like free metadata from the community, right? It's like, well, wait, like they're labeling for users are telling me how to make search for images better, like and they're doing that just because they want to, right? And so, we also looked at this company called Delicious. I tried to buy them. They ended up getting acquired. Joshua Schachter ended up getting acquired, actually, not for a couple more years after that, but for the same reason, which is I was just like, here is this kind of intersection of, people curating the web for us, and doing it because they're passionate about this category or these photos or this space, and they're doing it in incredibly kind of rich, nuanced metadata fashion. So there's a lot of really interesting search signals here that come from tagging, and so that was kind of part of what made us early interested in Flickr, was that kind of combination, and just a tremendous product. Just amazing team. Obviously they've gone to do great things at Flickr and elsewhere, but just really kind of wonderful product experience that is still in so many ways unmatched, even by Google Photos and all the photo sites out here today.
Ken, there's so much, and you're so good, so many good stories from you. I just want to make sure. Do you have at least 15 more minutes? Because we're going a little longer than I'd even hoped. But you have so much. Just make sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
I sure do.
Okay. So, all right. Then JotSpot.
Yes.
How do you get to JotSpot?
So JotSpot is a company founded by two guys named Joe Kraus and Graham Spencer.
Right. From Excite
fame. From Excite. Yep.
Yes.
So Joe and Graham were two of the I believe 6 co-founders of Excite.
Right.
And I had met them when I was starting Grand Central. And they had left Excite, and they were trying to figure out what to do next. And now that I'm in more kind of the venture world, I get that this is common, but at the time, some investors kind of set us up, right? They're just like, hey, I've talked to you. I kind of have an idea of what you're looking at and thinking about starting. You should meet these other 2 guys. Graham and Joe because they're great and they're kind of looking at something similar. So it's kind of like a blind date of, entrepreneurs vaguely looking at a similar space. I met them and totally hit it off. I'm like, these guys are great. Would love to kind of work with them someday. They ended up exploring something different. Kind of good for them because Grand Central ended up going nowhere. But kind of we'd always kept in contact, and so Joe had reached out to me, a couple times, and the time was right where I was ready to move on from Yahoo, and they had started this company called JotSpot, and JotSpot was really about, the kind of initial vision was really just about making wikis, easy to use, and so we had used wikis at Yahoo internally to just, manage all of our internal content and project sites and loved it, loved the fact that, basically here's this web page, anybody can edit it, and you have this whole version history, and you don't have to like edit HTML, you don't have to like FTP, you just start editing a web page. But it was really, really hard to use, right? It was just like, you got to know this like crazy, weird markup language. And so, their kind of initial vision was, well, if we can make, wikis for everybody, basically, really easy to use wikis, then, lots of companies are probably going to want this, right? And they may, this may become their kind of, internal, information management, system. And there was a bigger vision there too, that was really around, what we called, do-it-yourself applications. And there was this kind of sense that, at companies, there are, there's IT and there are software developers. But really, if you think about the glue, the applications, if you will, that run companies, the IT teams, they're only building a kind of tiny, small percentage of that. That most of that stuff's really being done in like, Excel and, word scripting languages and macros. And, you could almost even think of, Excel as probably like the number one, application development platform for companies. If you kind of squint a little bit and realize that, well, really any kind of structured list is an application.
Yeah.
And so we were like, well, could we give those people who are not IT managers, not really programmers, but, comfortable power users, like the person, to go to when you have a question about which Excel formula to use, right? Could we give them a lightweight suite of tools where they can build pretty robust applications to get stuff done, at their companies? So that was the original vision. And I got super excited about it. I was like, this is just, I wanted the opportunity to work with them at some point. But plus just really felt like that was hitting on a lot of cylinders for me. And so joined them as VP product in 2005. And, we had a lot of really good early success. We were selling into a lot of companies. We were getting, lots of kind of self-service signups. We were doing really well. Companies started to poke around. One of those companies was Google, and Google ultimately acquired us. Actually, we found out this morning, 12 years ago exactly today. So this is the 12-year anniversary of the Google acquisition. And for Google, this was they had just bought a company called Rightly, and Rightly, became Google Docs, but was really kind of, really amazing kind of interactive, word processing in a browser. They had bought another company that ultimately became Google Sheets, and they saw us as a part of that. Like, the JotSpot product ultimately became Google Sites, but they kind of felt as like, okay, there's this, basically this stuff is all somehow related, where there's going to be a suite of productivity tools that are going to be available to end users and the companies, and somehow JotSpot fits into this, somehow Rightly fits into this. We're not exactly sure, but let's buy, as Google was kind of prone to do, and I think wisely prone to do, is just like, we don't need to have all the answers. Let's just kind of bring these people together that are passionate about this kind of space in this category, and just kind of let them do their thing and see what happens.
Okay, so you almost just answered the question in the way that I was going to ask it, which was, So like you become like the product lead for Google Docs and like essentially what we call the G Suite now, right?
Right. That's right. Yep.
So when you come on board and you're tasked with doing this, I remember at the time people were feeling like, well, this is almost a strategic play. They're going to make productivity apps free as a thing against Microsoft to kill Office and things like that. But now, in retrospect, we can see how it fits into the whole Chrome OS, Chromebooks, all this
Mm-hmm.
whole thing. But I bet, based on what you just said, that was not there was no vision for that at the time when you're there, right? So like when you show up, it's just this is interesting stuff. These are people that know how to do it. We'll see where it goes. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, I can say that that was the vision all along, and then look like I'm a genius.
Right.
But
Exactly.
you're right. No, I think it was. So I think there's a bunch of different things. I think there was just a belief that you know that licensed packaged software that you paid for and you installed on a machine that was only one machine that may not be the only machine you use, just like that, just felt like an antiquated model. And it happened to be a model that one of our biggest competitors, Microsoft, had built their kind of entire business around. But it just to me it kind of offended my sensibilities that I would have to install this software on my Windows computer, and then if I wanted to share that file with you, I'd have to email that file to you. But now there's two of them, and there's three different versions, and like that's not very collaborative, and it's expensive, and it seems like overkill. And Office had become so bloated then too. Where it's just like, okay, what do most people do? In Excel, for example, well, they make lists of stuff. Do they use formulas? Well, probably most of the time they don't. But if
Mm.
they do use formulas, they're probably using one of these like 8 formulas, right? Like, how often do people use pivot tables? I don't know, like what, 3%, 5% of users? And so I think there was this sense that, well, what if all this stuff was in a browser, meaning you could get to it from anywhere? What if it was all, in the cloud, meaning that if you made a change, I could see it, and if I made a change, you could see it, and there wasn't going to be any like files and versions and lost data, and so I think that kind of that vision of really the cloud plus collaboration was something that we were all very excited about and believed in. Now, I didn't think that it would be as pervasive as it is. I mean, I was probably more bullish than just about anyone. I was the product manager for Docs, but I remember thinking, I could see, hopefully someday schools, you can see teachers and K through 12, and but probably there's always going to be lots of people and companies that are still going to need Excel, and they're still going to need Word, and so the idea that of course that's still the case, but like that people are writing books in Google Docs, like I wasn't sure, even in kind of my wildest dreams, I would have thought that was possible. I would have maybe thought, well, okay, for that kind of a use case, of course, you probably still going to have to use the old software stuff. But
Well,
um,
was that sort of like, almost famously like part of that's what that was in the water at Google at that point, where like you can be the product manager of something, and like we're saying, it now fits into this whole even hardware strategy, which you could never have imagined at the time. But so like Google at the time thinks, okay, this is a product that's interesting, we've acquired these people, they're smart, and then as long like they give it enough rope so that it finds its product market fit, or it finds its use for Google in other ways.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, and hey, there were naysayers. I mean, I went to many meetings where people are like, explain to me again why we're building a word processor. Like, I just don't get it. How does that fit into Google's business? I and in their defense, a few years later, I would be saying, why are we building a browser? Like what?
Right, right.
Like I just yeah, okay, that doesn't seem like that's really our core business. Do we really need to build a browser? Why is that? So I think that there was definitely skepticism, but I think this was let a million flowers bloom kind of days where it was understood that if we're going to do for every huge breakout success like a Google News or a Gmail, there's probably going to be 50 others that people try and just don't work out. And so if we want to have those breakout successes, like we have to be willing to experiment, we have to be willing to fail. And we just threw beta on everything too, right? So that was it
Right,
was
right,
always
right.
just said, Google Docs beta, so it was
Get
like,
out of
hey,
jail
just kind of
free card.
set the
Yeah.
expectation, yeah. Which, yeah, I remember that when we finally were just like, hey, we gotta like stop calling stuff beta because I just came from a meeting with like one of our first Fortune 500 companies that was like deploying it to like 20,000 users, and they're just like, yeah, I got to tell you, I'm having a little hard time selling it into my CIO because it says beta. um, but yeah, I think it was, if you could, and the company being, and still being a place that just really embraces trying and innovating and recognizing that, we're going to have some missteps, we're going to fail, but it's better not to have tried, with the air cover of, having people, more senior than you who believe in it, and are excited about it. And in the case of, docs, that certainly included the founders, was kind of enough for you to see where this went. And if you're continuing to improve the product, and I think the other thing is a big part of our culture at Google is everybody at Google is using the product. So we're dog fooding it, right? So everybody's writing PRDs and tech docs, and like we're using Gmail every day, we're using Google Docs every day, we're using Excel every day, and so we're seeing for ourselves how much of a difference this is making in our lives and our business. So that's creating more believers, and it's this incredibly robust source of feedback for making the product better, and so that eventually you kind of the flywheel gets going. And then you're established, right? Like, now we're real business. And for us, it was, when we became part of what at the time was called, Google Apps for Enterprises, and, now is today called G Suite, when we really became part of a suite of products that we were going to start selling to companies and ultimately to Fortune 500 companies, that, we kind of reached that level of maturity, that took us in kind of a now much more of a, maybe almost even like kind of an enterprise software direction in terms of how we think about how we build this product and how we support this product.
So I swear we're wrapping up, but a couple more questions, because you're mentioning product management and you've become somewhat quasi famous for your essay, How to Hire a Product Manager. So just briefly, if you could talk about it, maybe the key points about that, and maybe why donuts and product management have become
Yeah. Yeah, well, for me, and we kind of didn't touch on it, but it became obvious that my role, changed as we kind of told the story, where I went from being kind of an individual contributor on the engineering side to becoming an engineering manager, and ultimately
mm-hmm.
a product manager. For me, it was, I really enjoy the technology. Like, I love working with engineers. I like being close to technology, but I don't think I was ever the world's greatest programmer. Like, I think I was an okay programmer. Like, I maybe 40th percentile, kind of programmer. It wasn't bad, but I just definitely was not like one of the greatest programmers. And also what I found I enjoyed much more than the actual coding was the architecture, and how do we understand the problem that we're solving, and how do we decide what to build and what not to build. And then that kind of combined with this fact that I was the person that the engineers were perfectly happy to send to go talk to the customers or the marketing folks or whatever, because they trusted me, because I was technical enough, but also they didn't want to do it. And everybody else was always thinking, well, Ken's the engineer I'd like to have because he doesn't mind talking to customers, and he actually won't make a clown of himself or whatever. And so you kind of start to realize that there's this role between all these different functions, between the marketing, the sales, and the engineering, and the design, and where you're this kind of hub on the spoke. But you're in this position where you are really getting to help shape the direction of the product. Like, what problem is it really out to solve? What should it do? What should it not do? What are we going to say no to? what are we going to say yes to? And to me, I realized that's kind of really where I wanted to be. And, when I wrote that essay that you mentioned, how to hire a product manager, when I was at JotSpot, because I realized that I kind of kept being the person that people would come to and say, hey, we're going to hire a product manager at my company. Can you write the job description so that I can, post it? And I'd be like, well, before I help you write the job description, let's make sure we agree on what you think the job is. Because I think at the time there was, people would say product manager, but it could mean a lot of different things. It could mean a much more, marketing outbound type role. It would be more technical at other places. And so I kind of wrote that essay because it was actually started as a long email that I would kind of cut and paste and send to friends. And then I posted it, and it kind of filled this need that a lot of people had, and certainly a lot of people like me who found themselves starting to do this job and wanting to basically articulate, what they thought it was and how they thought it felt. It fit into everything else, and what it was and what it wasn't. And so I kind of wrote that, and then kind of started to publish more about product management, and started to get to know lots of PMs in the community and people who are kind of taking a lead on trying to really mature what that role really is. And I think what it's come to be, for the most part today, thanks in part to companies like Google and Facebook that, really kind of started to hire, people that fit that type of profile, and started to kind of articulate what that meant. So the donuts were, I went and did this talk at, I think it was at Berkeley Haas School of Business about product management. And I was trying to come up with, so I have this philosophy that, like, when you're the product manager, you actually have a lot of accountability, but you don't have a lot of, you don't have a lot of authority, right? So you're the one everybody's gonna yell at if the product doesn't go right, but you're not really anybody's boss, right? Like, for the most, certainly not the engineer's boss. And so if you have this attitude that, like, you're the boss, or what sometimes people call the CEO of the product, like, you're just going to get, rejected. Like, nobody's ever going to want to work with you, and you're just going to fail. And so you have to kind of really operate from this kind of sense of humility of, really being willing to do anything it takes to make the team successful, to sweep the floors, or, whatever. And, at JotSpot, I used to make the Costco run to buy, snacks for our little kitchen, because it was just kind of like, I didn't feel like anybody else should be doing that, right? Like, it felt like their jobs were too important, and felt like that's something that I could do for the team. And so I was trying to find a way to articulate that kind of, sense of, being willing to do anything it takes for the team. And so I did this talk where, I kept saying, how do you work with salespeople? Well, this is how you work. This is what you do. Oh, and also you need to bring them donuts. Well, how do you work with engineers? And you do this and you do this, and also bring them donuts. And so for whatever reason, it kind of just took off, where, I think a lot of product managers were like, yeah, that's right. I do. I am the one that brings the donuts, right? Or the bagels, or whatever it is. And so that kind of donuts thing has taken on a life of its own, and people bring me donuts, which is great.
Well,
if anybody's listening to this, feel free to keep bringing me donuts, by the way.
Well, so when it says on your profile on the GV website that you provide product and engineering support to startups, like, so essentially you're trying to inculcate that sort of a philosophy in the companies that you guys invest in.
Yeah, I think so. And for me, a lot of what I do with the startups is not the product stuff, right? I mean, you kind of don't, like, you don't want me to come in and review your mock-ups, right? I mean, I can do that, like, but I don't know your business as well as you do. I don't know your product as well as you do, but I can help you think about, what the role should look like. I can help you think about the type of people to hire. I can help you think about how to organize, like, what's the right process for the team? How should the engineers work with the designers and work with the product managers? So it ends up being a lot of kind of like people and process, which it turns out is, at least in my experience, the hardest part about product management. I mean, the technology sometimes is the easiest part. But yeah, I we've got, some 350 companies in the portfolio, and, all different industries, everything from life sciences and therapeutics to security to consumer tech. And there are various different stages of existence. Some are bigger, some are smaller. And so, I'm trying to be helpful in whatever way I can, around those areas that really kind of come down to product, people, and process.
I'm going to try to squeeze this in real quick. I was just looking over my notes. You were involved at product manager, like with Google Mobile Maps. Were you involved at all with getting Google Maps on that first iPhone?
I was not. So I was on that project. So that we'd started, we had a long and interesting history with iOS, but the first real true iOS version started about 6 months before I moved on from Android mobile maps. And it started in a different office. So, we were collaborating with them, but it was really a different office that was working on that.
All right, well then, Ken, here is my final question, which is, I always ask people what they're excited about today. Some people like you that are in VC want to tell me about what they're excited investing in. Malik told me he was into photography, so it could be anything. So just what are you excited about today?
Well, I'll answer it really broadly, and I think as a kind of a major area, I think it's really everything to do with machine learning and artificial intelligence, and I think because in so many ways I see it as similar to other points in my career. I started my career right when the web was taking off, and it was clear that I don't care what business you're in, what you're doing, what you're selling, like if you didn't have a plan for how the web was going to change your business, you were dead meat. And then I saw it again with mobile, at Google, where it was boy, if you haven't figured out how mobile computing is going to, affect your business, then you're late, right? Because it's going to change everything. And I really feel that way with machine learning and I think, broadly, I guess, artificial intelligence and deep learning and kind of all the various different aspects of it. It just feels like this is one of those things where it has the ability now, where we are with compute power, where we are with the developments that made over the last several years to just really change every single business. And so I am sure that there are a bunch of people out there who are like, oh, I do restaurant remodeling, or really I just do, insurance, resale. We just think that machine learning isn't relevant, and it is. It's going to completely change everything, and it just may. And all it may do is provide you incredible new insights to make your business more operationally efficient, and that may be all you kind of really need, and that kind of all that matters. Or it may completely replace what you're doing, and with an algorithm. So I tell when I tell kind of new grads who are like, well, what should I be studying? I draw a lot of analogies to hey, when I graduated from college, I just had the good fortune to just walk out right into the web, and this feels like that same time, where it's early enough where I don't think we've even scratched the surface on what's capable of being done, and yet we're not to the point where it's so incredibly frothy that everybody and their brother are trying to do it, and we're overhyped it. I mean, we're still, I think, in the very early days.
Well, give me a heads up when the AI replaces podcasters. But Ken Norton, thank you so much for coming on the Internet History Podcast and remembering all that great stuff. I mean, you might get the record for the amount of companies that I was interested in talking to somebody about.
Great. Yeah, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation, Brian.
If you like what you've heard on this episode, please support us by subscribing to the podcast so you can get great news stories and conversations every 2 weeks. And please buy the book that was based on this podcast, How the Internet Happened, From Netscape to the iPhone, by me, Brian McCullough. Order it now wherever books are sold. How the Internet Happened. And if you weren't aware, I host a daily tech news podcast every weekday that comes out at 5 p.m. In that show, I tell you what happened that day in the world of tech. It's only 15 to 20 minutes long, And it's great if you love tech news. Search your podcast app for Ride Home to find the show. It's called the Tech Meme Ride Home. Thanks.